everyone. Welcome back to Inside Look. Tonight we are talking with Daniel Mendonca from Windsor University. Daniel, how you doing?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you today.
No problem. Thanks for coming on. So first question is just, can you provide us with a little bit of history about your program and yourself as a coach, possibly, where you played as a player, kind of your history of coaching and how it led to your current position?
Awesome, yeah. So I some say I bleed blue and gold. I've been a Lancer for 13 years. I was a men's soccer player at the University of Windsor. I made the tough decision for a variety of reasons, family and some others, to stay home for school. Went to the University of Windsor. Played there for 5 years as a player, and then as a goalkeeper, I should specify. And then right after, I became the goalkeeper coach for the men's program, and then progressed through. And I was heavily involved in the high performance pathway for girls soccer in the Windsor Essex County area, helping players get identified. So I really understood the landscape locally, also the competition around the province. So progressing towards the university level in the women's game was a big part of mine. I'm a big promoter of women's athletics and the sports of that all across the area. So combining my passion for coaching and the fact that I was a Lancer for so many years, it was a big focus of mine to hopefully one day become the coach. And in 2019, that was a reality. So it's where I am now, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, homegrown hero there. Oh my God.
I don't know about a hero, but I'll take it.
All right. So now, as a coach, you talked about knowing the landscape so well and being around it for so long. What are some of the footballing qualities that you would say that you kind of look for across the board for any new recruit?
Yeah, so we as a program emphasize three things heavily in our redevelopment of our culture. So we call it being a AAA Lancer. So we focus on academics, attitude, and ability. So academics is a big focus of ours. A lot of the goals we set in my first year was around our academic average, achieving our degrees. So your quality of academics is a big part of ours. The second thing is attitude. We have 6 core values within our program that we emphasize and look for. And it's really is, are you off the field going to be the right type of person for our program, making sure the culture is right, the environment's correct. And then lastly, and I say it last because, pretty much everybody who's coming out to us as coaches are pretty good, footballers. They're pretty good players. But is what your ability is like, and not necessarily how good are you today, but what can you develop into. Obviously, the pace of the university game is the biggest adjustment, and not just attacking wise, the defensive pace. So we're looking for players who have the ability to press the ball, have the ability to communicate and press, and have high energy track runs. But then from Windsor's perspective and kind of how we play, I like supporting the ball. Our players like to have the ball at their feet. So what we've been progressing into and looking to develop into is a team that is comfortable on the ball, comfortable having more possession. Even some of the games in my first season that we lost, we had more of the ball than the other team. And that was just some of our progression of a program. So we're really looking for players who are just comfortable with the ball at their feet and, willing to put in the work.
Yeah, no, I mean that's going to be something that's going to be across the board, right? Because whether you're, you know, sitting on the ball as a center back, you're going to have to find a good pass. You're going to have to be comfortable maybe sitting on the ball for an extra half second and then breaking a line with a pass. And it's going to be something that's going to translate all over the pitch. And I mean, you kind of answered this a little bit. So, outside of football, the individual characteristics. So you talked about that, which was really good. As far as that's concerned, with all your new incoming freshmen, have you found that there's a really specific kind of characteristic that they have about them individually that you think, yeah, you know what, that's something that I love that about these types of players?
Yeah, one of the questions, it's a unique question, and some of the players look at me funny when I ask, but university sports is such an interesting thing. Most athletes don't realize whether or not they want to play university athletics until they're actually there doing it, because it is such an increased level of commitment. So I always ask the question of recruits, tell me about you and your life from the day you were born to now. And I can't really take credit for that. I heard PJ Fleck from Western, or he's Minnesota football now, but he's a big football coach, big on culture in the U.S. And he asked that, and it allows me to understand about how players, come across adversity. And typically, they always have a story to tell me about their childhood or their life or soccer. And I can understand what type of people they are. And our program's built around understanding each other's why. So sharing with each other, understanding who we are, why we're here doing it. I have a story as to why I coach and what motivated me to get here. Every player has a reason why they decided to stay home in Windsor or why they came from the Sault Ste. Marie or from the West Coast to come to Windsor. So the more we understand those personalities. So when I'm talking to individuals, I like a little bit of character. I love recruits who can hold the conversation where I don't feel like I'm pulling teeth for people, because that happens sometimes too. Just people who good, honestly, just good people who are going to come in and mesh well and vibe well with the team. Is really kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really important characteristic to be able to sit there and, sit there and have a conversation with someone. Because again, that's an off the pitch, important characteristic as a student. But then on the pitch, you're gonna have to sit there and talk and get information across.
We have an athlete. She's on our leadership council, and this year would have been her sophomore year. She played like 41 minutes. Her freshman season, not a lot. And we had a rough season in 2019. So, but she didn't play too much. And she's put in more work in the past 12 months than anybody on our roster, and it's showing it. But she's on a leadership council, and she received a vote from every single player on our team to be on the leadership council, because she's the girl who, when she sees somebody like sitting alone, she goes up and just asks like, "Hey, are you okay? Everything good?" Like, when freshmen come in to camps in the middle of summer before the school year, like, she makes them feel more important than anybody else who's there. And I think this fall, I think she managed to give like 9 tours to recruits, because we weren't allowed to give tours this fall. So she was there walking people around campus, and it's just that sort of attitude that really builds a foundation for us to build our program on. And that's what we're looking for the next people who come in too, people who are willing to step up and provide that warm welcome and that warm team feeling to our environment.
No, yeah, that's also, especially for someone who's probably only been on campus a few years herself, to step up and then start to do tours. That's pretty incredible. Now, before a player commits to your program, you just, baseline academic standards. There's going to be certain things that they need to meet to get into the University of Windsor. Kind of, do you want to speak about those a little bit?
Yeah, really depending on the program, the standards are going to range anywhere from 75% in terms of an average to 90%. Really depends on the program. Typically, if you're above an 80, then you're pretty good, except for a couple. Our high-end engineering program, our nursing program has a really high standard in terms of like 86, 87% average. But really, between 80 and 90, that's what we're looking for. The other thing too is, I mentioned this, our academics is a major part of it. And anytime I sit in front of or on a Zoom call in today's world with a kid and their parents, these parents aren't asking me about if their kid's going to go pro. Their parents are asking me about them getting a degree, right? And this year was a big year for us. We had the highest average in the past 10 years for the women's program. We had an 81% academic average. 19 of our 32 players were academic All-Canadians. And it was a huge year for us off the field in terms of, honestly, like, really hammering down on our core values. So we're looking for people to come in and add that. Typically with athletes, if I have trouble getting you into school, you're probably going to be a headache academically for most of the career. So I know every kid that I talk to or speak to locally about going away to school or staying in town, academics is always number one. You're more attractive to a coach as a potential student athlete for their program, if and when your grades are good.
Yeah, no, for sure. And speaking of grades, so if there's a really, really, really high academic recruit, kind of what would you say is probably the threshold if a player was looking for financial aid academically?
Academically, I mean, everybody sees some sort of financial aid if they get an 80 when they come to Windsor. So they receive something. And obviously that increases based upon program and based upon average. So I know I have some players who came in with a 90 plus average between what I was able to give them athletically for scholarship and academically they're in school for free. So but yeah, I mean, typically above 80, you're going to get some sort of academic support financially.
Okay, and then I know with U Sports and I'm sure with your program, there's a GPA requirement to remain eligible. And I can't remember what the U Sport. I think it's just a 2.0 or a C plus or something like that. That's the
Yeah.
like.
So U Sports is actually a 65% average. They have to keep the OUA has a different standard. The OUA's is 70%. So in order to receive an academic scholarship in the OUA, Windsor's no different. Obviously, being part of the OUA, you have to have an 80% coming out of high school, and then a 70% reoccurring year over year to maintain it.
Okay.
And yeah, and that's pretty standard across obviously all OUA schools follow those regulations.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. And then obviously, I mean, you guys are striving for well higher than a 70.
Yeah, like I said, our team average this year was like just under 82%. It was like 79 first semester, 83 second semester. Um, and it's been a huge, it looks like we're going to be around that again this year, even with the online school. So just proud of the athletes. It's what we're pushing them to do. We spend a lot of time in study hall and a lot of time in other places to help them and give them the necessary support. And it's paying off.
No, that's really good to hear. Now you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about culture, and I think you're hitting this home with your core values. But how important is it for freshmen to understand the program's culture right when they arrive?
Yeah, it takes time. I have a few mentors that I really speak to, some locally, some around the country, some in the US, and everybody said the same thing to me when I got the job in 2019. It's going to take you 5 years to build your culture um, until really everybody's in for a full cycle, or your seniors really have to be willing to change. And um, where we're at now, we had a 3-step process that we put into place. So the first was change the way you think. So I needed all my athletes to start changing the way they think about being a student athlete at the University of Windsor. The second was change the way you act. So, and that's where we're in right now is really change the way you act, which the players are, in terms of what their attendance looks like in the off season, what their commitment looks like, just little things too. I mean, within our book club, just other stuff like that. And then the last one is change the way you play. And we've been very honest with our athletes is we're continuing to improve and work on improving, but until we are thinking and acting like student athletes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's very hard to play like a championship athlete 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we've been on that. And number one, the freshmen we're recruiting already have a lot of those behaviors in tune with them. I'm being a lot pickier with who we're bringing in, and to say that. But the thing is that nobody on our roster right now, and we had a lot of attrition after my first year, people who left because what they thought they were getting into was not what they got involved. Just 4 or 5 athletes um, live and breathe like what we believe in as a program. I mean, I had a player in tears calling me because they think they might be leaving for their masters next year, and she's just like, "I want to be part of the program." So, um, but that's one of the things with recruits. I talk to them. I talk to their parents. The next thing they do is they have a conference call with players. They talk to players who are in their program. They talk to players who are, if they're from out of town and coming here, they talk to someone who's in res and allow the players to take the brunt of the questions from recruits because they're going to be blunt and honest if they don't like me, if they don't like the program, they think I'm full of crap, whatever it is. So it's important for them to learn, but it typically they have that foundation already, and then they just need to adapt it to who we are.
Yeah, for sure. Did you find there was a big difference between, your first class in 2019 compared to this year? Did you find there's a big
Yeah, I mean, I got the job in March 2019, so the class had already been chosen. And I was an assistant coach before, but so I had a little bit of influence on it, but not a complete influence. The 2020 class, obviously they didn't have a season, but the 2020 class was I call it my first full class, but I wasn't able to follow the full process with them. 2021 recruits, I started and finished it. And yeah, there is a difference in terms of the level of player, but I don't even know about the level of player. It's just about who they are. I'm a pretty sensitive guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, cares about my players a ton, and um, players who are coming in, if they don't care about their teammates and they don't have family values, typically we don't gel very well together. So there's definitely a difference in recruit coming in now than there was before. And that's just, I mean, every coach is going to see that, right? From players who don't vibe well and don't mesh well together.
No, yeah, for sure. Now looking at what would be a normal season, so disregarding, this past year, but when you look at kind of the life of a student athlete, how busy is it, especially at the University of Windsor, where you're traveling constantly through the OUA? Like,
Yeah, we do travel a lot than a lot more than other schools. No difference in those up in Ottawa. I always forget about them. But last year we played McMaster one day, and Mac was complaining about their drive down, and I had to remind them that we do it every weekend. So no, it's busy. I mean, during the season, we're in some capacity 7 days a week. I mean, even on our off days, they're recovering or they're in team groups, whether it's positional or the starters are reviewing and they're reviewing film together and analyzing and meeting and talking. So it's 7 days a week, and some days they have workouts to maintain their weight as well. So that trickles down to the recruiting process. One of the questions that I always like to ask, and obviously players who have been involved with FTF know this, like, how often are you playing soccer per week? How often are you working out per week? Because just like the transition to independent academics, which is what university is, right? It's more independent. Combining that to traveling from out of town, being an adult, and then adding 7 days of soccer. If they're not familiar with that behavior, it's a huge change. So during this season, it's going to be 7 days a week in some capacity, and then in the off season, we typically train. In the spring, we typically train 2 or 3 days a week, and they work out. They typically have four lifts a week as well. Some of those days overlap, so we tend to leave weekends open in the off season. In the spring, specifically, unless we have a game, allow players to go home, visit their families, chill out, be social. I'll say social rather than partying, but be social. They are university students after all, so everything happens during the week.
yeah, no, I think that's one thing that I mean, I remember doing this when I was coming into. I was used to the training every kind of day a week, but that's one thing that I have noticed with a lot of recruits where you're talking like, you might not train that day, but you're in the gym.
Mhm.
You
And
might
that,
not train, you might not have a lighter session, but you're doing video. There's so many more aspects that go into it that again kind of translate almost to the academic side of it where you need to study. You need to look at what you're doing, what you're not doing as well that you could improve on and see how you can try and improve on it through the week and through the season.
exactly. I mean, that's where study hall. When we talk about 7 days a week, like that involves study hall. Like we're together, and especially for freshmen, like mandatory study hall. Some players hate it, despise it, but the
I would,
reality of it is like it helps. It does. Like when you leave practice, last year we practiced late, so they were leaving practice at 8:30. Like it's really hard to go home and study after you just train for 90 minutes. So having that study hall before practice is a huge deal, and players typically don't realize it until like afterwards. So but it's so helpful, and it makes everybody feel more comfortable. So
yeah, no, for sure. And kind of talking about the balance there. What do you think is the most important aspect that a student athlete will need to figure out about their lifestyle?
Um, Sleep's important. The only thing that we do as coaches and student athletes is deprive ourselves of sleep. Everything we do deprives ourselves of sleep, academics, athletics, traveling, etc. So what I try to tell athletes is there's a few different components to your life. You have family, which is number one, followed by school, your academics. Then you're going to have soccer, and you have your social life, and you have sleep. So, gotta have those five components, and they all need to be scheduled. Um, some of my players laugh at me when I say this, but then they figure out that I'm right. Is like you need to actually like if you're gonna go hang out with your boyfriend, like you need to schedule that in. If you want to go watch 2 episodes of The Crown or whatever you watch on Netflix, like you have to schedule that in, like because if not, it's really easy to forget about the things that are most important to you, which are number one, your sleep and your nutrition and that. But you have to schedule in your whole life, and that's the biggest part of time management. They forget that they think student athlete, and then they also forget that no, seeing your friends every once in a while is important too, and going to visit your grandma is important too, and all of those things that make you a well-rounded person with a lot of other things going on. So I always talk to them about making sure they don't forget pieces of their life when they're trying to balance school and soccer, because there's other portions of things you need to balance as well.
No, for sure. That's one thing that I know I struggled with almost immediately there when I went through the process. So it was something that again, as I learned, and then once you figure that out, you see a really direct correlation between figuring that side out and then improved performance in the classroom and on the field.
Well, the second, I mean, the sleep thing is the biggest one, right? I mean, we had a coaches meeting internally of all the Lancer coaches, and the question that we talked about was like, how can we help improve our athletes' sleep, and what does that look like for us? And we talk about like, okay, if we travel up the day of a game, how bad is that for our legs? And we're like, yeah, but if we get up at 5 a.m., um, is it bad? Or if we drive the night before and they sleep in not their own bed, like is that work? You know, it's all those things, and it's that time management is huge, and just it helps to not feel overwhelmed, right? When people are relaxed and they don't feel overwhelmed, they tend to perform better. So that's a big part of it.
You know, for sure. And then at the same time, if you're saying, well, we're going to drive up the day of the game, that's going to be worse for your legs. Well, you'd better have had a really good sleep the night before because poor sleep is just going to compound the issue.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the our leadership council brought this up last year. I mean, we only had one overnight trip last year, where sometimes we have to play weird back to backs out of town. Um, the question was like, if I stay home, let's see how we react. Like, we can study at home. How well are we going to study in the hotel, right? And so, should we study at home, sleep at home, get up early and drive up in the morning, make sure we're there a lot of time ahead so we can warm up properly, or do we sacrifice our academics a little bit? So there's always a lot of questions to ask, but that goes back to the time management and the coordination of all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of touching back now on the recruiting side of it. I'm not sure if you've had time to do this, but what are kind of some of the advantages that you would see from recruiting someone that maybe spent some time in like the CCAA or a JUCO school?
Yeah, I think it's that transition period. If you relate it to anybody who's ever gotten a job, you've ever started to work somewhere, there's always an orientation period. Um, we as a program, this is what we talk to our athletes about, and some players really don't like to hear this. The reality of it is there is a very small percentage of freshmen that are impactful in their freshman year. There's just the percentage is so small, and they don't like to hear that because they all think they're going to come in and play nonstop, and they also have some other coaches tell them they're going to lead the team and all this stuff as freshmen. The reality is it's typically not the case. So year one is always about helping our players become university soccer players, helping them become Lancers. And then year 2, 3, 4, whatever comes next, is them giving back to the program. And when you have somebody who's been to a JUCO school or have been there already, they tend to be able to relate to the university game in terms of its intensity, its commitment, and all those things sooner, or they already can do it and they can step right in, rather than, I mean, we have players in the middle of October who are they're starting midterms, they're homesick, they're like, all of those things occur, and when somebody's already been in the environment, they typically can handle it already. So there's a huge learning curve that's already happened, not in our program.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty standard answer across the board. It's just, that first little bit is it's such an eye opener walking in as a freshman, just going, this is what life's like now. Like I have to, and again, you talk about the balancing act of all these things, and
Players always seem shocked when I bring that up to them. And I know other coaches in the OUA especially like feel this way as well. We talk to them about that. And the reality of it is like, there are so many other things you have going on in your life that you're transitioning in, that subconsciously soccer takes a back seat. Like, and because when I listed the priorities earlier, like, the reality is soccer's third on the list. And that's the way it probably should be. And so it does sometimes take a back seat, and most coaches understand that, right? Like, if somebody's flunking out, like, they're going to tell them to not come to practice, to go work, go see a tutor, or go to study hall, or do whatever they need to do. So that's the big adjustment, and it is a massive adjustment. And players who, like I said, who've have done it before. I'm dealing with a player right now who was in residency with the Whitecaps for a year, and like, the fact that she was away from home is a huge deal, right? Like, she's going to adjust better to being away from home than any of her other freshman counterparts, or
yeah,
she should at least.
well, he has that little bit of experience, right? So, now when you're looking at, especially, in today's day and age with everything going on, highlight tapes and video is so important. What are certain things that you look at for recruits that you need to include these types of highlights, but do not include others?
Yeah, I'm going to specify them too. I'm a goalkeeper, so I always have to mention goalkeepers because they play by different rules. Um, it, I personally like full game. So um, highlight films are great and all, but I can make myself look good in the center of the midfield in a highlight film. I do some good stuff. So it's nice to see your movement, your hip position, whether you check your shoulder, some good highlights, always put a smile on your face. Typically they got some good music in them. So, but I love full game film because I can see how you progress across the whole period of the game. And the other individual part is how you mesh with your teammates as well. So I personally like full games. I watch a lot of full games. I don't think my wife likes I watch a lot of full games, but I watch a lot of full games. So, I mean, I would never send a full game when you first introduce yourself to a coach. The highlight film always has to be there as the appetizer, get me interested. Um, Talk about what league you play in, because the quality of the opponent in your highlight film is also a big part of it. Ontario or Ontario high school soccer is typically not the highest of standards, so it's hard when your whole film is high school. So seeing those elite level players you're playing against always helps. And then after that, after we start a conversation, I typically always follow up and ask players for full game films to allow me to really make my decision there. And then combined, I mean, COVID's unique right now because there's not a lot of game film to go around. That's just the reality. Um, build This goes back to, I mean, same rule as in university, like having a good relationship with your coach is a good thing. I tell all players the same thing. No coach is going to lie to a university coach about the player that's being recruited. They don't. They're honest. And if you're not committed, they're going to tell that coach you're not really that committed of a player. If you have a flaw, they're going to bring it up because as well, the coaches are helping their players get recruited. Um, and they have to be honest, or else their reputation goes out the window. So build a good relationship with your coach that you have, or your technical director, or FTF if you're working with them, and combine that with some decent film, and typically you'll at least progress down the way and get yourself to an invite only camp, not necessarily a full camp in the middle of summer, but an invite only camp where you're training with other university players.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, those are all super, super, super important. Um, Now, again, we're talking about a lot of normal year stuff.
Mhm.
So this year's not quite
Oh, yeah.
the same. But so, what would you say are some of the typical showcases that you would normally annually like to attend?
Yeah. The Umbro is a big one for me, obviously in Toronto. Obviously, a lot of players from all over the country come to it. Um, I typically, being in my proximity to the border, will attend some of the Midwest showcases in the U.S. Just because we do have a family and friends discount for U.S. athletes, so we're starting to dip over there a little bit. The Ottawa City of Champions showcase, I think it is the August long weekend, is typically a big one that I'll go to. I used to go to the BC High Performance Showcase. I'll probably return there in 2022 because I doubt it's going to happen in the spring of 2021. We're starting to look in the BC market a bit more for players as a school, and our university is promoting a ton in BC right now. Um, and then after that, I mean, I love OPDL in Ontario is a big gives us a big access point. I mean, they're hosting neutral venue locations every weekend, pretty much throughout the summer. So we're able to go next year. Oh, next year Windsor was supposed to host one. Who knows if that will even happen? But like they happen in Guelph and Toronto and that, and then I mean, I have no problem going up to 401 to watch games. And then I mean, I didn't talk about them, but FTF has their combines, and I do enjoy the combine aspect where for any program where I can get on the field and run a couple sessions with the athletes, sit there and watch them, because watching them in their own environment, which is where I prefer to watch them. But it's nice to see that little bit of difference when they're on a team of 11 players who they've never played with before, and the way they lead and the way they interact and the way they do all those things are is huge. So that's I think a long-winded answer for a pretty simple question, but it really depends what goes well, and also like players will reach out to me as a coach and say, "Hey, I'm going to be here," and I'll look it up, and if it looks promising, I'll go there because I mean, there's countless other players I might see. So
Yeah, no, for sure. And just following up on that really quickly, when you're talking about, oh, when players are just me, when would you typically start like your next recruiting class? So when, like, kind of when was like, this is when I start to look at a class,
let
grade
me.
nine,
I'm
grade,
gonna
and then they kind of progress.
I'm gonna think about this out loud because COVID's completely screwed up everything. There's just absolutely no timeline. I really, really feel for the 2022 recruits. I feel like they're really getting the the stick on it on being recruited. But typically, what we try to do is basically be 2 years out. So in a typical year, I would have an invite only camp or ID camp in January of 2021 for all the prospective athletes that I was looking at for 2022. So we like to have our players signed and sign their LOI as early as they can, which is in September of 2021. So they're September, their grade 12 year. So between January 2021 and May 2021, which would be the Umbro, is really the point where I'm going to solidify the 2022s, at least make offers that I'm going to make, have those final conversations. Some things will trickle in throughout the summer. Kids make decisions, conversations progress, but ideally, those 9 months leading up to the start of their grade 12 year is the focus of for me 2022. I do also identify, like, I know that the Toronto Combine is postponed at the moment, but like I would have spent time identifying 2023s this winter, start to email, have conversations, learn a little bit more about them as people, as how they are, what they're thinking about. And honestly, I spent a lot of my time with that 2023 class this year because I'm a year out still, giving advice. Like I'm willing to give a half an hour of my day to a grade 10 student who's not really sure what the heck they want to do with their life or with school or soccer, giving advice and and then progress through that. So I have a few 2023 calls lined up for January, and I'll start down that process. So typically, if you were to use 2022s, I mean, we want to wrap them up by next September, and then be into the same cycle for 2023s, where from September to May, we're really looking to dial in and figure out who our group is.
Okay, gotcha. And just lastly, any further advice for any prospective players that youth that would be interested in coming into your program?
Probably the biggest piece of advice that I have is your personality is who you are is everything, and sometimes at showcases and in conversation with coaches, players can act and try to be something they're not because they think that's what they're going to impress. um, I always tell players, right place, right time, right coach. um, that's when you're going to get recruited, is being in the right place at the right time, and the right coach watching you and having that conversation. So there's no reason to ever go out on a field and not be who you are, not just, be everything you believe in, go in all in on your strengths. And it's the same thing when you're on the phone with them, like be who you are, show off your personality. There's no reason to be shy. The worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to say no. And then there's, somewhere around another 1,000 academic institutions across North America that may be right, maybe the right fit for you. So be who you are, and the opportunity will come to you. Everything always works out. That's the thing I've been telling 2022s who are freaking out because of COVID, is everything always works out the way it's supposed to be. That's, I mentioned to you earlier, I had my daughter in February, and I've gotten to spend an immense amount of time with her. Everything always works out. So got to look at the bright side and approach it that way.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, Daniel. We really appreciate it.
Awesome, Adam. Thanks so much. I really appreciate everything that FTF does.